it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Would Dan King ever find the hidden lair of the beastmaster, who nightly sent his hairy hordes to maim and kill? How could he possibly locate that den of ghastly horrors in time to save his beloved from becoming the fiend's willing plaything, a creature half ape, half woman? Satan's Scalpel by Arthur Leo Zagat. Chapter 1. Ape Attack. Into the sideshow tent the strident blare of an organ filtered. A barker's raucous shouts, the crack of rifles from a shooting gallery, or the surging happy commotion of Cramport's annual gala night. It was spring. Solburn super shows were once more starting out on the road, and the factory town was getting a preview of its refurbished marvels. The simple people of the community were also getting, all unknowingly, a preview of the horror that was to come before the gaudy caravan returned to its winter quarters. Horror that would paint faces now glowing under the flare of carnival torches with the grey of grisly dead. That would make screams of terror tear through throats now chortling with laughter and replace happiness with the desolation of fear-bred madness. Hot, hot, get 'em while they're red hot, a Wiener vendor cried, and from the thriller ride shrilled the jovial shrieks of its tumbled patrons. But within the canvas walls of Zortal's tent, the clamour was muted by a strained, taut hush. The terraced bleachers were in shadow, so that from Dan King's front row seat, the packed benches were only a mounting blank of pallid blurred ovals. But he knew that their occupants were hunched forward, silently, almost grimly intent on the huge ape in the central arena, staring at the ape and the stocky, swart-visaged human in close-fitting tights of green silk who stood to one side, glowering and quite motionless. Gasoline flares, high on poles, stabbed down at the hard-packed earth, filled the ring with a dancing, fitful glare. The long black lash of a cruel whip hung down along Zortal's leg and coiled at his feet, but neither by word nor sign was he giving any direction to the shaggy, lumbering primate in its incredible routine. Nada Stone's little hand crept into King's protective one. It was icy, quivering. "Oh, I don't like it," she whispered tremulously. "There's something wrong about it. Something dreadfully wrong." A shudder ran through her slender body, so tinglingly close against his own. The brood is better trained than most, that's all," the young automotive engineer rumbled. But even as he said it, chill prickles ran up and down his spine, and he was conscious of a faint quiver at the pit of his stomach. Was it some primeval fear that crawled sluggishly in his blood, some ancestral memory of the days when man first moved into caves, and the tree people still stalked him through many steamy jungles? But, then again, he'd seen great apes before and felt nothing but a mild interest. In the hulking chimpanzee padding noiselessly out there was some eerie, too human quality. Vaguely he too sensed that it had passed through some strange metamorphosis into a being neither beast nor man, into an entity beyond the pale of familiar things. The gigantic beast, bent-kneed, long-armed, blackly hirsute, shuffled to a large mound in the center of the ring and jerked a tarpaulin from it. A stripped automobile chassis stood, revealed, with bare framework, and beside it a helter-skelter pile of gears, steel rods, castings, all the multifarious parts of a car's power plant. Ranged on a canvas strip were wrenches, spanners, and other implements. The polished tools splintered light into darting gleams. Muscles tightened along the ridge of Dan King's square jaw. A murmur ran through the crowd, almost a moan. Nearly all of them workers in Cramport's 2 automobile factories. Every man in the gasping audience had often just seen such piles of jumbled parts. King, himself part owner and engineer of the Mayflower plant, had arranged more than one such display for speed tests between crews of expert assemblers. Good Lord, was this ape... Oh, the astounding speculation became reality. The primate snatched up tools, fell on the tumbled mass of fabricated metal, and with incredible swiftness it changed. With unbelievable speed, a motor grew on the chassis, a crankshaft clanged into place, connecting rods were fitted to their bearings. Muscles swelled under the shaggy hide. The tremendous chest heaved as weights ordinarily handled by clanking cranes yielded to the chimpanzee's gigantic strength and were lifted and dropped meticulously into their beds. Grotesque black paws darted in intricate manipulations with a deftness, a dexterity that no human laborer could surpass. "Oh, no, Nada whimpered. "It isn't doing it. It can't be. It just isn't possible." She was warm, palpitant within the curve of Dan King's arm, but in that moment he did not wonder at his daring, at her acquiescence. His throat was dry, his brain throbbed with an astonishment that was almost pain. He pulled his gaze from the fantastic performance, sought saner things for assurance of his own sanity. Across the ring, nearly opposite, Ned Salburn leaned forward, his heavy-jowled face flushed, his jaws working on his eternal tobacco cud. Further along was Warren Fenton, superintendent for United Motors of their Hiawatha factory, Mayflower's bitterest rival. Fenton's fox-like expression was livid, his eyes almost popping from his head. The emerald-clad man in the arena was somehow more upright. There was a swagger in the tilt of his, Zortal's, shoulders, in the poise of his head, as though he was saying, with gloating triumph, "I have done this, I, Zortal the Great." From somewhere high up, a hoarse voice boomed. "Hey, come out from under that mask, Pat Cooney. We know you. Come out." Well, tension broke as boisterous, almost hysteric laughter swept the big tent. The great ape dropped its wrench, twisted around to face the jester, and King's scalp tightened as he saw in the beast's russet fur a bald spot crowning its browless skull that had a gargoyle-esque resemblance to the popular foreman who had quit the factory without notice about a month before. Then the similitude was gone. The ape was altogether bestial as it loped forward, its curved knuckles brushing the ground. Light struck across its snouted, leathery expression and the bridgeless spread of its flat nose, while the grotesque visage worked with some obscure emotion. "Hey, get back there!" Zortal shouted, coming alive. "Get back!" He was moving to intercept the chimpanzee's path, his long, wicked lash lifting in his sinewy hand. Well, the ape came on, ignoring its master, thick lips snarling away from yellow fangs as it came straight for King, and he half lifted from his seat with some dim notion of fending the brute off from Nada. Suddenly it was very near, and Dan could see its look. His skin was suddenly a tight covering for his quivering body. His palms were wet with cold sweat. Good God, those were not the eyes of an animal. A soul looked out from those eyes, a tortured human soul, and in their blue depths fear crawled in a suffering, terrible way. Something flashed across King's vision, and there was the crack of a gunshot. No, it was Zortal's whip as it lashed across the ape's hairy back, lifted, writhed, and bit savagely again and again into brute flesh. "Back to your work! Back, I say!" A clamour beat about Dan. Shouts, a woman's scream, was suddenly swallowed, blotted out by an abysmal, thunderous roar that filled the tent with the sound, almost tangible, that blasted its listeners with devastating terror. The ape whirled on its tormentor. The outlash of its colossal arm was the lightning strike of a rattlesnake, and Zortal's whip was in the grip of a black, gnarled paw now, and was wrenched from the trainer's grip as the beast crouched and then pounced. Zortal went down under a grunting, snarling tornado of hairy fury, and the flash of green silk was gone. Dan King was somehow now in the ring. He was tugging frantically at a pole at the top of which a torch flared. A shriek burbled in his ears, a shriek of purest agony. The rod came away in King's hands, and he whirled, threw himself at the monstrous, snarling simian. his extempore weapon pounded down and flame splashed on tossing red-brown unkemptness. Burnt hair, frying flesh, stung its nostrils, and the chimpanzee surged upright, twisting. King leapt far back, and the enraged beast loomed over him, tremendous. Its brutish mouth yawned cavernous, and its bellow was about him like a black flood. Fetid breath gusted over him. For an off instant, fear ran icy in the engineer's veins. Monstrous arms flailed, and the giant ape sprang, still roaring, to tear him apart. King's muscles exploded into swift movement, and he lunged forward to meet the cataclysmic rush, and thrust the blazing flare squarely into the brute's face. Well, the creature screamed, and the man leapt back out of its reach, lithely. The flame pot rolled across the ground, vomiting flame and black smoke. The chimpanzee thudded to a halt. It clawed at its cooked face with huge hands, and he saw that in the deep-sunk sockets under the overhang of its forehead there were blackened cinders where eyes should be. Nada was suddenly beside King, clutching his arm. "Dan!" the girl shrilled. "Dan, come back! He'll kill you!" The ape whirled to the sound, lurched blindly toward it, great paws sweeping out to clutch Nada. In a single flash of action, Dan hurled the girl aside, lanced the stake at the cyclonic onrush of the maddened brute, and jabbed its pointed ferrule into the ape's gaping mouth. The impact threw King backward, sprawling upon the ground, but the beast's own terrific momentum impaled it, drove the pole out through the back of its neck. Blood rush choked off the nerve-shattering roar, and the gigantic animal pounded down, a threshing, gory horror. King rolled over and scrambled to his feet, frantically seeking Nada. He fought the nausea that retched bitterness into his mouth. Figures were all about him, blocking his vision. Someone grabbed his hand and pulled him around. A crowd ringed him in, white-faced and spewing oaths. It split apart, and Zortal came through, his green suit ripped, one arm dangling limply, shoulder askew. King stared at him, stupid with amazement. The man's face was contorted with rage, his eyes black with fury. "Damn you!" he squealed, rage thinning his voice. "You've killed him! Murderer!" The fellow's good hand came up, forming a fist. Dan's muscles knotted, but pudgy fingers, those of Ned Salbin's, grabbed Zortal's wrist. "Stop it, you fool!" the showman roared. "Stop it! He saved your life. You'd be in little pieces now if it wasn't for him, and the rest of us were paralyzed." The trainer's thin mouth twitched. His stocky frame quivered as he visibly fought to gain control. But, he husked, "he's ruined the work of many years. The greatest attraction." "Ah, the devil with that," Sorwin replied. "You'll get another chimp. Train it. I'll keep you on the payroll, and then next year." "Ah, to hell with next year." Well, wrath seemed to have drained out of the man, but his expression was still livid, tiny fires smoldering in his eyes. "I'll have another one for you in 2 weeks. A better one. I know how now." Disbelief showed in the carnival proprietor's expression. "Well, all right then, 2 weeks. But come away. Come out of here. Let's go get your arm fixed." Dan, darling, are you hurt? Are you all right?" King wheeled around to see Nada. Her white frock was dirt-smeared, and there was a brown splotch across her cheek. But something in her eyes sent a thrill through him, surging warmly in his veins. "Nada." He reached for her. "Nada, let's get out of this." Words were on his tongue that for months he'd choked down, and hardly dared to think. "Let's get out." The crowd parted for them. They went past Zortal, and the man lipped, "I won't forget you, Mr. King. I won't forget this." It might have been thanks, but somehow the man's green costume seemed to make him oddly reptilian, poisonous. His black, cold eyes flickered from Dan to the girl his arm encircled, and little lights crawled in them, little lascivious lights. There was a crowd outside too, and more coming on the run, brought by swift rumor. "Hey, what happened, Mr. King?" someone called, reaching out to stop them. Dan scarcely heard, and didn't answer. They were in his Mayflower 8 and were roaring away, out of the fairgrounds, out along the car tracks of the shore road to where the big house stood, set far back from the road. As a shoeless kid, he'd long ago brought the laundry to the back door of that house. The small girl in crisp organdy whom he would see on the lawn, black ringlets curling about her tiny, piquant face, fat little legs twinkling, had made him poignantly conscious of his tattered clothes, of the tumble-down shack in Frog Hollow that was his home. Once she'd smiled at him, and he'd run away. He thought he'd forgotten her in the long years between, years filled with days of grueling labor, with nights of more grueling study. His inventions, his genius for the management of labor, had multiplied the production, the profits of the Mayflower plant. Even when Roger Stone had recognized his ability, had given him greater and greater responsibility, and last year taken him into partnership, Dan King had still remained the kid from Frog Hollow, and the big house at Palace, with the girl who lived there unapproachable as royalty itself. Well, she had come into the office more and more frequently. He'd been wordless in her presence, awkward, had found duties to take him out into the plant. But increasingly, she'd haunted his dreams, and when her father had asked him today to take her to the carnival, he had trembled inwardly. He slowed the car at the big stone gate and turned to her. "Nada," he murmured. "Nada, I love you. I've always loved you." Chapter 2. The Headless Corpse. The rush of night air about him could not quench the tingle of Nada's parting kiss on Dan King's lips. A vast excitement possessed him, joy pulsed in his big body. He wanted to shout, to trumpet it triumphantly to sleeping Cramport. "Nada's mine, all mine. She loves me, do you hear that? And she is going to be my wife." Trees gave way to flatlands, and the dark loom of the Mayflower plant's low buildings was unreeling in his sight. Yellow oblongs showed windows still lighted in the administration building. Roger Stone was still there then. King's sedan nosed into the cinder driveway and skidded to a stop. The broad-shouldered man with hair that was as black as Nada's, save for graying temples, looked up from a desk spread with blueprints and sheets of typed manuscript. Dan halted inside the office door that, for the first time, he'd flung open without the formality of knocking, and tried to find word to tell Nada's father of what had happened. There was a smile of approval on the older man's aristocratic expression. "Dan, my boy," Stone said, "you've done it again. The new car will cut the feet out from under the Hiawatha Company. We'll be able to undersell them by $200 and deliver a better job for the money. I've already had Johnson send off the patent applications to Washington. We'll be able to start production in a month. Congratulations." "Thanks." King brushed aside the phrases that only this afternoon would have meant so much to him. "Well, glad you like it, but, I got something to tell you about Nada." The other man came up out of his chair. "Nada? Something happened?" "Oh, no, sir. That is nothing bad." Dan was now stammering like a schoolboy. She is promised to be my wife." Stone was a graven image standing behind his desk. The office was deathly still. Papers crackled under his blue-veined hands as he pressed down on them. "She's promised to be your wife?" The words dribbled from his lips that were white under his grey moustache, and there was something in the way he said them, something in his eyes, that brought a hot flush to King's cheeks. "Well, I picked you out of the stink and filth of Frog Hollow to make a man of you, and this is how you thank me? You..." Contempt was a knife edge in his tone. "The son of a drunkard who died in the gutter, of a washwoman who scrubbed my drawers, are going to give me grandchildren? Oh no. Slow anger mounted in Dan. His great hands knotted, nails digging into their palms. But he managed to hold himself in place. You did not make a man of me, Mr. Stone. Whatever I am, whatever I possess, I have earned. Fenton would have had you down long ago if it weren't for me. If you wish, you can have it all back. My job, my partnership in the firm. United Motors has been after me for years. I can go to them tomorrow, and they'll be glad to have me. You can have the new car whose plans lie on your table. I'll give them a better one. And Nada will go with me. You can't stop her. She loves me, and you can't hold her. Silence again clotted in the room. The two men faced each other, their stares clashing, indomitable, their wills wrestling in a wordless combat. And then, quite suddenly, Dan realized that Stone was an old, broken man whose hand abruptly gestured in a curious, almost pathetic movement. Nope, I can't hold her. I've never been able to do anything with her, not since her mother died so long ago. And I need you. I need you, Dan. Just give me a chance. Let me take her away on a trip somewhere. Look, she's so young, she may not know her own mind. And I'm tired, sick. I need a rest. If she still wants you 3 months from now, you can have her. And we'll go on as before. King sucked breath in between cold lips. She was necessary to him now, a part of him. And not to see her for 3 long months. Oh, you're not afraid, are you? If she loves you, as she says, 3 months' absence will make no difference. And if it should, well, you have no right to her. No right. Well, it was a challenge he could not evade. All right. He didn't want to say it, but he had to. God help him, he had to. All right, go ahead. Its motor purring sweet rhythm that should have been music to Dan King's ears, the Mayflower 8 poured itself down Railroad Street. The engine should have been music, and the far-off hoot of a locomotive whistle wailing down the night wind should have set pulses leaping in his wrists. For Nada Stone was on that train, bringing her back to Cramport and to Dan after the 3 long months when he hadn't heard from her, when he hadn't even known where she was, the girl that he loved more than life itself. Oh God, if only he'd been able to wire her, to tell her to stay away, to stay far away from Cramport, from the fear-cursed town where terror now ran rampant. But he hadn't known how to reach her until the telegram had come, a half-hour ago, to say that she was on the Cannonball Express. And then it was too late, except to jump into the sedan and send it rocketing to the station so that he could catch her there, make her stay on the train and send her away. Old Pete Foley had goggled at him, swinging back the big gate so that he could go through the high barbed wire fence. One of the guards had come running, the floodlights glinting on his sawed-off shotgun, to shout incoherently at him. They'd been afraid for him, and he was afraid too. With hammering trepidation running like a cold flame through his veins, he feared that which was loose in the factory town. For a weird menace had made beleaguered fortresses of the Mayflower factory, and of the Hiawatha Motor Works on the other side of town. The wind of his own speed stung his red-rimmed eyeball sharply. He squinted through the windshield. Oh, look! Even downtown here, even here in the heart of Cramport, where the terror had not yet struck, where men were not yet mysteriously, strangely missing from their homes, fear was a dark river inside shuttered, door-barred houses. It was early. It was only 8 o'clock, but the only moving figures to be seen were 2 patrolmen, coupled for protection, with their guns in their hands as they walked down the center of the roadway, away from shadowy alleys, from the lightless nooks that might be ambush for whatever it was that snatched men out of life into some unnameable fate. Stores were tight shut. The station plaza, as he'd rounded it, was a broad, deserted expanse, its asphalt somehow gleaming ghastly under the light filtering down from ornamental lampposts. King brought his car to a squealing, skidding halt. He flung out of it, thumped stiff-legged across the sidewalk, shoved a shoulder against a swinging door. He was inside the waiting room, was pounding between a long row of benches toward the exits of the tracks. His footfalls echoed hollowly under the high domed roof. The place was empty of life, and was filled with brooding, breathless dread. The blind was down over the ticket agent's window, and there was no gateman. Dan stopped short, his skin crawling. What was that on the floor, sticking out from under the bench? A shoe. A foot. He knelt down and got his hand on it. His other hand, supporting him on the floor, found something wet, warm, sticky. The body at whose foot he tugged came sliding out, spreading a pool of its own blood. Oh, God. The corpse had no head, only a shapeless mess of pulped flesh and smashed bone where it ought to have had a head. What was once a uniform was now just shredded grey rags, matted with clotted blood. The oncoming train whistled again, nearer this time, and outside the rails hummed. Through King's retching nausea an alarm blared, and he twisted, stood up, and started to run. But a tremendous form, black and grotesque, avalanched down upon him from over the top of the bench. Chapter 3. Terror at the Crossroads. Ducking to avoid the attack, Dan King's feet skidded out from under him on the blood-red tiles, and he went down flat, half-rolling. The pouncing, shaggy monster missed and thudded alongside him. King realized he was under the bench and kept on rolling. A big, hairy arm darted after him, and a huge paw, black-taloned, was snatching for him and caught the hem of his coat. He tore the cloth away, came out into the aisle on the other side. He got his knees under him, shoved with his hands, and leapt up. 2 huge apes had come out of hiding in the deserted waiting room of the station. A gigantic beast loomed in front of him. His big, thewed arms went around him, hugging him against stiff bristles that rasped his face. Grated his lips as his mouth came open for a yell that the hairy hide stifled. The beast's circling hold constricted him, making breath wheeze from King's lungs under the irresistible pressure. Excruciating pain seared his back, his chest, as a steel trap squeeze crushed his ribs. His fists beat a futile tattoo on the brute's sides. A yellow-toothed grin between thick black lips blurred in his burning, bleared vision. Dan's knee jerked spasmodically up, found softness and drove into it. The ape squealed in agony and his grip relaxed, slightly, but just enough for King, the desperation exploding into momentarily redoubled strength, to enable him to jerk free and stagger backward. The further bench caught him, held him upright, and he sucked sobbing breath into collapsed lungs, and had a fleeting glimpse of the primate doubling up, and kicked savagely at his agonized groin. A shadow fell across him. He wheeled around to see the other ape towering over him, its splayed feet groping for a prehensile grip on the top of the bench separating them, its huge legs haunching to pounce. Terror pronged King's breast. The jungle denizen launched a ferocious swoop, and Dan's heels drove into the tiles, catapulting him forward and under the down-circling arc of the hairy monster's leap. His outflung hands clutched at the bench top the beast had just left, giving him a hold sufficient to vault the high-backed furniture. He pounded down, just missing the sprawled corpse of the murdered gateman he'd discovered. He hurdled the gory cadaver and pelted toward the track exits. Padding footfalls behind told him the brutes were on his trail. He could almost feel their hot breaths on his neck. The eerie, macabre silence that had shrouded the incredible struggle was shattered by a sudden high, wild shriek from outside. It crescendoed to a wailing, ear-piercing scream. Then there was the pound and hiss of a locomotive driving past, the screech of jamming brakes. From somewhere a thin whistle shrilled. King lurched between out-jutting brass rails, crashed against a door that didn't swing open, that was appallingly immovable, locked. His last hope of escape collapsed like a bursting balloon. He was penned in, utterly lost. Panic and despair twisted at the pit of his stomach, and he whirled to face the oncoming bestial doom. He gasped, stung by the discovery that the savage primates were no longer intent upon him, but were surging out through the street entrance. He reeled, snatching at the short, curved rail lengths that had made a standing place for the guard who would never stand again. Half-stunned, he fought for breath, fought to still the pound of an overtaxed heart hammering against the walls of his aching chest. Through vertiginous darkness swirling inside his skull, dim realization came that the fearful messengers of an awful death had been scared off by the sound of the arriving train. The train! Nader! He pushed himself away from the rails to which he clung, threw himself around the barrier, thrust at the next door. That too was locked, mocking his efforts. Oh God, he had to get out there, had to warn her. "All aboard," a far-off voice intoned. "All aboard." King was running wildly along the line of rail-guarded doors, was frantically trying each one. The very last swung open. Yellow light squares were already sliding over the platform as the express crashed away. He shoved his way through, saw Nader peering about her, far down, a bag alongside her. "Nader!" Dan shouted, sprinting toward her. "Nader!" She came to meet him, and was in his arms within a second. His lips, that had thirsted so long, were crushed against hers in a long embrace. She was warm, dear in his arms. "Darling," he murmured, "it's so good to have you back." Then, momentarily forgotten terror was back, cold at the base of his brain, and he pulled away. Chaotic words rose to his throat. He swallowed them as he remembered that the train was gone now, that there was not to be another till morning. His plan to send her away was blotted out. He must think, must find a way to safeguard her. Meantime, no use in frightening her. "Oh, Dan, I've longed for you so. If Dad hadn't been with me, I would have found a way to write to you. But he put me on my honor before he went away." "Away? Wasn't he with you in—" Dan stopped short, sparred for time, and tried to think. "Florida? No. He took me to Miami and left the next day. Said he wanted a long fishing trip all his life, and that I wouldn't enjoy it." But King scarcely heard. They were alone on the platform now, and those apes might be back. The apes, good Lord. What did the attack in the station mean? Were they the prowling menace terrorizing Cramport? Had they marked him for their next victim? "Come on," he blurted, picking up the girl's bags and taking her arm with his free hand. "Come on, let's get going. We need to get away from here." He started off, his glance furtive, fearfully searching the shadows. He was fairly dragging her, half running. "But Dan," Nader protested, "why are you going around outside? It's shot through the waiting room." "Yeah, but there's someone I want to avoid is waiting for me. We'll go this way." The gateman's body was still in there, and she must not see it. "Look, here we are. How do you like the new car? Isn't it a beauty?" Well, he must let the police know about the dead man, but not now, not till he had Nader indoors, safe. "Oh, it is. I must drive it." She pulled away from him, had the door open, and had slid under the wheel. A flicker of movement, seen out of the corner of his eye. This twisted King around. Shadows at the end of the station seemed to be taking on rounded form, seemed to be coming alive. He twisted back, flung Nader's bag into the sedan, and jumped in. "Get it started," he yelled. "Quick!" The starter whirred as she clicked over the ignition key, and the girl's small foot went down on the button. The motor roared, gears clashed, and the car jumped forward like an unleashed greyhound. Wind beat in under the lifted windshield. Darkened houses flicked past. "What was it?" Nader flung this question at him, her eyes steady on the road. "You sounded so scared." pulse thumped in his temples, dull pain throbbed in his chest. Every breath was stabbing torture. He was corseted with agony. The battering he'd sustained, the terrible squeezing, anesthetized at first by excitement, by the thrill of his sweetheart's return, were now showing their effect. He couldn't think straight. But he must not scare her. Let the sharp-clawed fear tear at her that was slicing his own brain. He had to get her to safety, behind barbed wire, under the protection of armed guards. Accident at the plant, he answered. So hard to talk, each word searing his lungs with new pain. Gotta get back there, quick. Hurry. Once there, once safe, he could finally tell her. An accident? You're hurt, Nan. Your face. No, not hurt. Working hard day and night. Just drive fast. I'll tell you when we get there. Don't talk now, just hurry. Working hard? Oh, God, as the car hurtled through the night, the torturesome weeks of which this was the culmination reeled through Dan King's throbbing mind, a motion picture film edged with corroding acid. The days of feverish preparation for the new model, the start of production and the great ads flowering in the newspapers all over the nation. And then came crashing catastrophe. On that very same day, other ads had appeared, proclaiming in staring black type cuts in Hiawatha's prices that made Mayflower's drastically lower ones seem extortionate. Devastating cuts. Well, investigation had driven into King's being the certitude that Warren Fenton must have had a spy in his designing room, for the patent application had scarcely had time to reach Washington when a high board fence had gone up around the Hiawatha area, and the workers there had not been permitted to leave it. Hiawatha must have made changes too. But what changes? King had purchased his competitor's product, had torn it down and analyzed every bit of its fabric. There was no cheapening in material, in design. The only saving could be in labor. He'd met Fenton's cut with another, only to find his rival going under his price again. King was selling at cost now, but Hiawatha's cars sold far below, unbelievably cheaper. Even if the unions would have stood for it, there was absolutely no room for any wages for the workers. How were they doing it? Mayflower was equal to the new reduction, but it was suicidal. Bankruptcy stared at Dan King, swept down upon him. He'd been a very vortex of energy. He'd been everywhere in the plant, cutting down every least waste, speeding up, exhorting, driving his men till they were strained to the very last pitch of exhaustion. Years of cooperation, of good treatment, had their reward, and the beleaguered manufacturer had begun to see light. Then, the terror had begun. One by one his workers had vanished, gone into some eerie limbo of oblivion. At first he'd thought Fenton was raiding him, but, even admitting disloyalty, if Hiawatha had won away the missing laborers with higher pay, where was his rival's saving? Even United Motors' great treasury could not stand such a drain. Desperately, King had fought on. He'd put up a barbed wire barricade of his own, floodlighted and patrolled by armed guards. He'd set up cots for his men, had forbidden them to leave the place. The assembly line was moving again, was speeding up. All day long autos were spewed out of the two great plants, roared away in long motorcades to a public that was making saturnalia of the weird battle. While the night shift labored, gates were closed, barred, and sentineled. The conflict was at a stalemate. Battling alone, Dan King had been a staggering Atlas, carrying the Enterprise on his stalwart shoulders. With the period of Roger Stone's self-exile ended, with him returning, the scales might yet turn. Good Lord. A grisly speculation trailed across his mind now. Was that the reason for the attack upon him? Was there some macabre connection between... He jerked upright. The road ahead curved, dipped to a fork whose bright branch went toward the Mayflower Works, whose left was the shore road passing Nada's home, going on to the Hiawatha plant. Just as his car's headlights scythed through blackness to impinge on the intersection, they caught a black, huge form that had leaped back into the shrubbery with the ungainly yet swift gait of the apes he'd just been battling. An ambush. "Hey, stop," he yelled, snatching for the emergency brake. "Turn back." The motor sound cut off. The sedan lurched, skidded, and slewed half around. Its front wheels went into a ditch. There was a rending, tearing sound, the crack of fractured metal. His auto seat dropped sickeningly beneath King, and Nader lurched against him. "Oh, the axle smashed," he grunted, icy with realization that escape in the sedan was now impossible. Darkness blotted the road now, but senses sharpened by fear brought intimations to him of a black mass moving along it toward them. The skewed headlamp beam showed a wilted, straggly garden and an unpainted low shack. As frail as it looked, it was the only shelter, better at least than the smashed car. He tugged at the door handle of the car and felt a moment of sinking despair as it resisted his efforts. He pounded his shoulder against it, and finally it gave. Sprawling out, King surged to his feet. Nader was staring at him from the car, white-faced, and now the pad of oncoming footfalls thudded menacingly against his ears. He mouthed some unintelligible exclamation, dragged the girl out, and was pounding now towards the lightless house. "Dan!" the girl gasped in amazement as he pulled her roughly along. "Have you gone mad?" King pulled in a sobbing breath as his feet pounded on a creaking porch. A door faced him in the drab wall, and he snatched at its knob, praying that it was not locked. He went inward to his thrust. He pulled Nader inside, slammed the door shut, and leaned against it. "No," he lipped. "I'm not crazy, but the world is." Nader was a pallid spectre in the darkness. "I tried to keep it from you, but horrible things are loose in Cramport." His searching fingers, fumbling for a key or a bolt, felt the splintered metal of a smashed lock. The furniture bulked vaguely in the gloom. He lurched for the largest, got hands on a heavy table, and tried to drag it toward the door. "Here, help me." Nader sprang to his assistance. The table moved, smashed against the portal just as unshod feet thumped on the porch beyond, and a body thudded against the door. The whole structure shook at the impact. The girl screamed once and clung to King, and then a snuffling, animal sound came from outside, and at the same time, in the very room with them, they heard the slither of stealthy movement. The rustle of fabric scraping against the floor. Something was creeping craftily toward them. Chapter 4. Sean O'Flaherty's Doom. The menace outside, the menace within, clutched King's throat with choking fear. Of the two, the mysterious, crawling thread inside was the more imminent, the more appalling. The ape would be held back for a moment, at least by the hasty barrier. Nader came up against him. He could feel her trembling, could hear her choked whimper. He got a hand into the pocket of his jacket, found wood matches, got one out and scraped a thumbnail across its head. The murk fled when the match flared. A shabby drab room sprang into flickering existence, a doorway on a scabrous wall. A hand, grey, skeleton-like, grasped its sash low down. A fleshless, cadaverous expression hitched into view, almost level with the floor. Mad eyes glared at King from sunken, dark sockets, and the barrel of a shotgun shoved out, lifted with snouting menace. King leapt, catapulting across the chamber. He had his fingers on the gun barrel. It came away easily, too easily. Nader shrieked, and the scrape of the barricading table cut across her scream. "I can't hold it," she screamed. "He's coming in." King whirled. The dark wall was slitted by white light from his wrecked car's headlights. The slit widened, was jogged by the table, by Nader's shoulder, and was blotched by a silhouette beyond the door, but the tall black outline of a shaggy ape flank. The gun butt jarred against his shoulder. "Get away," he yelled. Get away, Nada. The girl's white form swept aside, out of the line of fire. Gun roar blasted, thunderous in the confined space. There was suddenly a jagged-edged, gaping hole in the door. A howl of rage and pain shrieked through the night. King fired the other barrel, and the roar of his shot was deafening. When the ringing in his ears had faded, he heard a thin whistle and receding, thumping sounds that quickly faded out to silence. He got to the door, scrambled over the table, and peered out through the gap he'd made. Vague, lurching shapes were just vanishing into the night. He wheeled around. They're gone, he gasped, shaking. They're gone, Nada. Light. Make a light, Dan. The girl's tone was stifled, taut, and a moan sounded, but not from her. King got out another match, stabbed it into flame. Nada looked fearfully toward the doorway at the form that lay there. Dan King found an oil lamp and got it lit. The figure at which Nada stared, wide-eyed, was a flaccid, deflated old man. Sparse, white wisps of hair barely covered his scalp. His skull was visible through the tight, almost transparent skin on his aged, yellow visage, and wrinkled lids drooped over bulging eyeballs. King went and looked down at the scrawny, half-clothed form. His thin back lifted and fell with shallow, labored breathing, but King's spine prickled as he saw the ancient's trailing legs, saw that they were horribly twisted, broken as a wanton child would break a despised doll. Recognition palpitated in the aching throb of Dan's brain. This was Sean O'Flaherty, pensioned off by Roger Stone 2 years ago. This afternoon his son Francis had begged for leave to visit the ailing father, and had not returned by nightfall. Now King knew he would never return. This was not the first visit the apes had made here tonight. There was a sudden rattle in the old man's throat. The frail, tortured body arced, blood gushed from between his thin lips, and then Sean O'Flaherty fell back and was still. Damn, a fighter to the last, King muttered. Evidently the old man had been aroused from a numbed coma by the noise of his and Nada's entrance, had thought them the simian marauders returning, and had dragged himself along the floor on a mission of vengeance. Dan! Oh, Dan! Nada quavered, shuddering. What's going on here? What awful thing is going on? King got his arm around her and held her close. I thought I could keep it from you, but... well, listen. And rapidly, concisely, he told her of those past terrible weeks. That's why I was in such a rush to get to the plant. I knew you'd be safe there. But now, with the car wrecked, I don't know what we're going to do. They're afraid of the gun, Dan. They ran away when you fired. But he shook his head. Well, I got a hunch they'll be back, Nada. There's something peculiar about those apes, about the whole thing. I mean, the grim, purposeful way they fight. The peculiar whistle that controls them. I have a strange feeling that a human is behind their activities. Some human fiend. He broke off then. The thrum of an approaching car came clearly in, rose to a roar, and then cut off. King wheeled to the door as footsteps thudded, and he lifted his shotgun. Hello there? Someone called. Hello inside. Anything wrong? Hey, who's there? King challenged. Who is it? Hey, that you, King? Thought I recognized your car. This is Fenton. Warren Fenton of Hiawatha. Wait. King reached the door, pulled aside the table. Fenton came in. Slim, dapper, his sharp face anxious. What? He began. Oh, hello, Miss Stone. I didn't know you were... Then his expression changed as he saw King's weapon, as his eyes darted to the corpse on the floor. Oh, great Jupiter. What's happened? Plenty, King snapped. The damn beasts that have been raising hell around the county got one of my best men here. Killed the poor man. Almost got us. Apes, Fenton. Great apes running wild. I'll be damned. Apes! The astonishment was vivid in the man's face. Was it acting, or... King quenched the half-formed thought. Nonsense. He couldn't have anything to do with them. Hey, have you notified the police? Fenton asked. Oh, the police. I've been trying to get Miss Stone to a place of safety. Hey, take us to Mayflower, will you, Fenton? I think we can get through now. Can't, I'm sorry. Gotta get back to the plant right away on the hop. But I passed the Stone place, so I'll drop you off. You can phone the cops from there, and I'll chase some of my guards over to help you till they come. Hey, look, take us to your plant. I'm afraid. King checked at Fenton's narrow eyes, at the suspicion flaring in them. Okay, all right, he said wearily. I understand. You're afraid I'll see your secrets. Oh, the inside of the big house was musty-smelling, fetid with the dust of disuse. Dan King locked the tall entrance door as Nader switched on a light. He turned. Hey, where's the phone? Nader's hand came up to her throat. Dan, I forgot. It's no good. We had it disconnected when we left. A pulse throbbed in King's temple, but he still managed to grin. Never mind. Fenton's guards will be here soon. You go and wash those smudges off your sweet face. I'll stay on watch down here with this gun, but I don't think there's any real danger anymore. We're too close to Hiawatha for them to attack us. He knew there was neither rhyme nor reason in the words, but he had to say something to quiet the girl's apprehension, to dim the little fires of terrible fear in her eyes. What? Well, I'd rather stay down here with you, Dan. I'm afraid. I'm deathly afraid. The man made his tone firm, though. Oh, do as I say. What kind of wife are you going to make if you're going to argue every time I tell you to do something? Well, Nader smiled wanly. Wife? How could that sound? All right, dear, I'll obey. Then she turned from him and climbed tiredly upward. King's tortured gaze followed her till she was out of sight on the landing above. Her small feet pattered along the stairs hall. From outside, leaves rustled, somehow ominously. Was it the wind soughing through the foliage, or... Apprehension swelled within him, tightened a squeezing hand to his heart. Then sudden anger brought a pulsing, red mist before his eyes. He wouldn't cringe here, waiting for an attack. No, he would go out and drive them away. He shot back the door bolt and was outside. Night shrouded the landscape grounds, lay like a silent death shroud over the lawn. The thick bole of an ancient locust blocked his vision, and he strode a pace or two forward to get beyond the obstruction. Then a huge shadow dropped out of its foliage and hurtled down on him. The back of his head crashed against the tree trunk, and the world exploded into whirling, coruscating nothingness. Well, my dear friends, what do you make of this one? We are about halfway through this epic tale of terror and mystery and whatever else it is, and I will be finishing it on Friday night. So yeah, we've got about 2 hours worth of story altogether, so just coming up to the halfway point there. Bit crazy. What are these apes? Where do they come from? What are they doing? Whose control are they under? Well, we shall find all of that out on Friday evening. But if you can't wait for more of the Dr. Creepen experience, then join me on my second channel tomorrow night, and pretty much anywhere you get podcasts from, for Dr. Creepen's Dungeon. I think we're up to episode 81 already. Time does fly when you're having fun. Well, till the next time, my dear friends, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hope Hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.